Holbrook Travel is pleased to bring you this webinar today, Finding Wild Places in My Backyard with photographer Cindy Cohn. Lots of us are staying closer to home right now, and while it's always a thrill to travel to far off places, there's also great satisfaction that comes from discovering more about the species and habitats in our own backyard. We're joined today by birder and photographer Cindy Cohn, who's based in Southwest Florida. In just a moment, I'll turn it over to Holbrook Travel specialist Lisa Palmisi-Graubard, who will introduce Cindy and talk a little bit about how the relationship between Holbrook and Cindy got started. Then Cindy will give us a look at some of her amazing photography and share stories about some of the signature Florida avian species that she's studied and photographed, including the curious and comical burrowing owls of Cape Coral, as well as the Florida scrub jay, Florida's only endemic bird. She'll also take us on a journey to some of her favorite Florida habitats and the wildlife that lives there, including alligators and other reptiles, and a few local mammals, such as the marsh rabbit and the Sherman fox squirrel. And then at the end, we'll save time for questions. So again, please submit those at any point during the presentation. So now I'd like to turn it over to Lisa. Hi, Lisa, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for joining us today. It is an honor to introduce Cindy Cohn. She's an amazing photographer who started her career in public education as a teacher, then an administrator and a consultant. She has an interest in photography, national parks, and conservation issues. She has volunteered with Earthwatch and done workshops with the Cornell Lab. She has also completed the Florida Naturalist modules. Her work has been published in magazines, books, and numerous digital platforms, and she's won numerous juried awards. And she has been working with Holbrook since 2014. She came across Holbrook at a wildlife festival, the Space Coast Wildlife and Photography Festival. As she lives in Florida, not too far on the other coast, she attended the festival and met my colleague Fran. Fran and Cindy have been on many adventurous planning sessions across the world. And now that Fran has moved on to being an air specialist, I have the honor of now working with Cindy. And it's been a pleasure to assist her with destinations such as Costa Rica, Cuba, Galapagos, Peru, and of course, Madagascar. And so now we're going to work with her on something that's very near and dear to her in her own backyard and ours as well, Southwest Florida.
Hi, welcome, Cindy.
Hi, well, thanks so much to Lisa. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks, Lindsay, for getting this all set up. And thanks to Holbrook Travel. Yeah, I've had some great adventures over the years. Okay. Let's work on this sharing. There we go. Well, as a wildlife photographer, living in South Florida has given me many opportunities. Birders and photographers from all over the country, in fact, all over the world, come to the Florida beaches and the Florida birding hotspots such as Corkscrew and Sanibel and Ding Darling. And probably every week of the year, starting in late winter, early winter to late spring, you could go to one of these hotspots and find a nature photographer giving a workshop. So these are the areas I like to go to also. And there's such a great variety of beautiful wading birds. It's a treat to see them in their breeding plumage, at their nests in these various habitats. Watching them as the young nestlings grow, going to the beautiful beaches of Sanibel and Captiva for the shorebirds, and the fishing reddish egret like this one here. And of course, the roseate spoonbills are always a favorite to see in many of the Florida locations. Another favorite is the Florida alligator that can be seen from Corkscrew to the wetlands, Shark Valley, part of the Everglades. And everything was great until COVID hit. Workshops stopped, and many of my favorite places were also closed. And that's when I discovered I was a bit of a wildlife or wilderness area snob. I was content to go to these designated wilderness areas that were national wildlife areas or Audubon sanctuaries, but I was really neglecting all the wildlife that was to be found right in my backyard. And I literally do have many birds that come to my backyard. There's a little mitigation pond behind me. But for my talk today, I'm going to include a few areas within 5 miles radius of my house. I'm here on the edge of Prairie Pines, which is a nice little preserve. The problem with it is once the rainy season starts in Florida, it's flooded. And well, you need more than waders to go through there easily. But there are a few other places. There's the Charlotte Flatlands Park up to the north of me, a tiny little marsh and creek south of me called Powell Creek. And then there's this area called Festival Park, which is right now abandoned lots, dirt roads. At some point, it might be a festival area with ballparks and stadiums, but right now it's open land. And that's where I got a great lesson in looking in my backyard from this pair of Florida scrub jays that live there. Now, the scrub jay is the only bird that's endemic to Florida. And it's the only bird in Florida that specifically needs a sandy, scrubby habitat. It's a habitat that's diminishing because of population growth and development. And this area about 5 miles from me is really not true Florida scrub, but somehow, in some way, this pair of Florida scrub jays has found its way here. And they like to hang out, and especially around these two areas with the pine and the kind of scrubby area, and it's sandy enough. They've lived there for a couple of years at least that I've known. I discovered this through an eBird alert. And it's been a lot of fun to go see these scrub jays. Because they're declining and they're such a special species, they're monitored rather closely. So you'll notice the adult birds are all banded. It has the federal band here in silver, and these are other auxiliary markings that I'm not sure what they stand for, but the wildlife biologists do. They're omnivorous. I had fun watching them since I've had time to be around them. They like to hop from place to place looking for caterpillars or grasshoppers or just seeds and nuts. But I still didn't spend a lot of time here other than looking at the scrub jays. The one thing that makes them a lot of fun is they're so social, so gregarious, so friendly that after coming a few weeks, especially last May, I was starting to travel here more frequently than I had in the past as my other favorites were closed. They'd hop right to the car door. And I was careful not to encourage them, never bringing food, because that's obviously not something we want to do. But I found I had to use my phone to take photos sometimes because they were way too close for my lens. So I would get out of the car, leave them to explore, and sit back and just watch. Such a striking bird. I love the subtle shadings of white to gray and the blue and the beautiful blue tail. What changed my viewing time there was a discovery made by my friends Deb and Carolyn, who were also looking for some wilderness. They were here in Southwest Florida when they normally would spend summers in Alaska. So they were looking for any wildlife they could find also. This is just to show a bit of the habitat. This is where my snobbery comes in. This is not the picturesque setting for most of my photos in the past, until Deb and Carolyn found mama scrub jay feeding 3 little babies. So of course I had to go out there as soon as I could, standing back, not getting too close to that little scrubby area, and waiting until they approached, which they did pretty quickly. Starting out in these little fluff balls of mostly brown and gray in May. Plumper and not as elongated as the adults. Before too long, they were exploring a little bit, hopping around in the branches. And after a few weeks, they began to look a little bit more like their parents, not as much down. And they were definitely more adventurous and would come out from the bushes, hop to the branches closer to the ground and out into the roadways. It was just so much fun watching their plumage change as they grew. This is still probably late May, early June. Started exploring for their own seeds, learning how to hop like the parents. I spent a lot of time on the ground getting little pricklers all over me, but it was worth it to get these close up and head-on views. And even though they were exploring, they fully expected to be fed by their parents and let mom and papa know when they were hungry. So it wasn't long before they were exploring around my car. I had to start closing the windows or they would have been flying through. Made sure I didn't have any snacks left inside the car. Those long tails are feathering out. The front plumage is changing. It's not as downy. They're becoming pretty good flyers by now. And they're about the size of their parents. And this was either late June or early July. Well, one day I went out and sat at the usual spot and no scrub jays came to greet me. So I thought, well, okay, they must be visiting elsewhere. So there are other birds in the area, most notably the burrowing owl. And I wanted to show this. This is what a burrowing owl nest or area looks like. And the PVC pipe and the perch had been provided by the Cape Coral Friends of Wildlife, who really monitor the burrowing owls and keep them safe. I hadn't seen a family here last summer, but I walked down that way anyway to just take a look and to see what I could find. And before I knew it, I was surrounded by both adults and all 4 fledgling scrub jays. And I don't think I'd ever seen all 4 before. In fact, I wasn't even sure there were 4. It was a windy day, so the adult here on the left has kind of an interesting hairdo feathered out. And it was so much fun watching the young ones hop and jump from perch to perch. And I could really notice the difference in the plumage and see that now it was late July and they were really starting to change to their adult plumage, some more than others. I just love this little light blue by the beak that would soon be covered in blue. And they, as babies do, they don't all develop at the same time. So this one didn't have too much glue on his head yet. where this one has that gorgeous blue just starting to come in here, and the little bits on the back of its head that are the deeper blue. This one was the probably most developed, that had some of the blue in the chest area. That's a hint of the adult plumage to come. That's a look at mama or papa. Again, the wind was doing strange things. It looks like the head's not fully attached, but it was just the wind poofing out the feathers. By late August, when they stopped by to visit my car, they were really changing. And I just had so much fun watching them and noticing the changes. By September, this is one of the fledglings, and he just has a hint of his juvenile plumage now, that little bit of gray. But when I saw them from the back, it was hard to tell if I was looking at an adult or a juvenile, except the fledglings hadn't been banded yet. And this was a picture taken in January of this year. This was one of the guys born last May who is in full adult plumage, and I know it's the yearling because he doesn't have the bands yet. Now, in all this time, I was going to this basically abandoned lots. While waiting for the scrub jays, I did take time to observe other birds. And one of the favorites there is the eastern meadowlark. So I gained some patience lying in the grass waiting for a meadowlark to come close enough, or one crawling around so I wouldn't scare it away. They have such a beautiful call. And because I was waiting and observing more closely, it was the first time I also saw a baby meadowlark. You can tell it's soon going to be like its parents, but it's a softer, more lemon yellow. And it was making little peeps for its mama to find out where she was. And that's how I first discovered it. Same thing with the loggerhead shrike, which is another prevalent bird in this habitat. So I had time to watch them carefully. They're known for catching insects, sometimes then catching them and impaling them on barbed wire fences and going back to eat them later. But by listening, I heard some chirps coming from this tree. And sure enough, before too long, a young loggerhead shrike came out. And actually, he was waiting to be fed also. But I had never taken the time to look for young birds because I would be off other places looking for the more exciting birds. Actually, in the times I visited, this is a mockingbird, which is very common, red-winged blackbird, fish crow. There's even a family of bobwhite quail that I saw from a distance a few times. And in addition to the burrowing owl, I found out that there's a great horned owl that can be seen in the neighborhood every now and then. This past summer and fall, I saw 45 different species of bird in this unattractive, vacant area that I wouldn't have found at all, except for COVID and the family of scrub jays. There were a number of raptors that I could see flying overhead at various days, like the osprey, which is pretty common in Florida. And one of my favorites, the swallowtail kite. They journey from South America and are just arriving in Florida now. I haven't seen any yet this year, but some of my friends have. So this was a great place to see them flying over the empty fields. This is one of the smallest raptors in the United States, the little kestrel that used to be called sparrowhawk. And it's often seen there. I was surprised a few weeks ago to find a Cooper's hawk there. This is a northern harrier. I've seen it a number of times. They fly low over the fields. And there are a number of bald eagles in the area, both immature ones and full-size adults. If I ventured a little bit farther away to this shrubby area with a few trees, I found the small birds too, the little warblers such as this yellow-rumped. This is an eastern phoebe, the blue-gray gnatcatcher, and these are all birds that are 3 to 4 inches. Palm warbler, that's pretty common here in Florida. And here was a real prize. Now, I wasn't the first one to see this bird here, but someone did, and it was a true treasure. This is a groove-bill ani that's not supposed to be in Florida, and it was the first sighting in Lee County ever. The map here on the right shows where the groove-bill ani can be found. It's about the size of a crow, and it's the cuckoo in the cuckoo family. And it's known for that big curved beak that has grooves in it. There's a similar species, the smoothbill, but he created quite the stir for a number of weeks with people coming from all over to see this groove-bill ani in this little area called Festival Park. Another find in this area was a gopher tortoise. Gopher tortoise is found in Florida and southern Georgia, I believe. It's a land tortoise. It's known as a keystone species because it provides habitat or homes for up to, I think it's 360 other species that use its burrows after they abandon it. Their habitat is also declining, so it's always fun to see one of these guys. And while we're talking about tortoises and turtles, this is another handsome turtle that's found in Florida, the Florida softshell. I found this fellow in the park up to the north, the Charlotte Flatlands. They're known for their kind of flat carapace, kind of pancake-like, and their snout-like, almost snorkel-like snouts. They're found in freshwater habitats, and they can be anywhere from 6 inches to, I think, maybe 30 inches in length. This little guy, well, I was going to say I found it in my backyard, but I have to confess my dog found it first and was sniffing it, and I rescued it from him and got a chance to photograph this. He was maybe, not 3 inches, less than 3 inches, coming out of the hatch, had hatched from the nest and was going straight to the lake. And this is probably the largest one I've ever seen. Face only a mother could love, I think. So the third area, to the south of me, it's a wonderful little wetland area that's not frequented by too many birders, but the people who live around it enjoy it for walking. I typically see people in the morning walking. This photo was taken last May before the rainy season hit. Things were drying up. There was not a lot of water. So as in this day, you could find almost every Florida wading bird right there. And again, 3 miles from my house. Now, what drew me as I was walking one morning, and there weren't many birds, but I noticed this bright pink that's in the right-hand corner. And I know those were snail eggs. And I always like to learn more about them. As I walked over to look at the eggs and hopefully photograph them, and there was movement in the water and noise. And here with these things. Any guesses what it is? It's another, actually not just a member, it's two members of another Florida species. Maybe you can see a shell here and a foot grabbing onto another shell. I was being rather voyeuristic as I watched two Florida snapping turtles mating. Oh my goodness, what a sight they were. This is another rather large turtle. I didn't want to get too close to them because they actually do snap. I'd seen them before, but never actually moving or doing much, certainly not mating. Yeah, but I was voyeuristic. I watched them for a while, and it was quite an interesting sight. They also have webbed feet. They don't have the long snouts of the softshell turtle. Thought that was kind of a nice, I don't know, wedding pose. But back to those little pink things. The pink snail eggs are actually invasive. They're from the island apple snail, and they arrived here somehow and have taken over quite a bit of the native apple snail, whose eggs are white. This is just a close-up. And it was unsure what the impact would be. Typically, as we know, invasive species are not a good thing. And the animals that, well, the birds that primarily diet on the apple snail were the limpkin and the snail kite. This is an immature snail kite. You can see the sharp beak that it actually uses. That's how it pries open the shell of the snail to get to the meat. And they've been threatened. They have definitely been declining and were only found in certain habitats. They fly low over the marshes, looking down, looking for the snails. What researchers have found is that this invasive snail, probably for the first time ever, has been a good thing, as both the limpkins and the snail kites have adapted to eat them. And since they are more prolific and they are larger, the limpkin population, as well as the snail kites, have increased in many areas. So as I was walking around, I was just interested in really observing these little snails, because the shells are huge, anywhere from 2 to 3, sometimes 5 inches in diameter. So even though this looks white, you can see these were the pink eggs of the island snail. And right before they hatch, or they're beginning to hatch here, these white ones are where the snails have already left. You can see a few tiny ones. Here they're a little bit larger, but the snails fall to the water, and eventually that's what the snail shell looks like. This is a great photo of the male snail kite. What quite a handsome bird. The adult males have the orange on the beak, white band on the tail, and this beautiful slate blue. And it's got a nice breakfast here. I have my friend and fellow photographer, Kathy Whitehurst, to thank for these photos of the snail kite that she took a few weeks ago. You'll hear a little bit more about Kathy at the end of the presentation. She's going to co-lead a Florida birding adventure with me. So thanks to Kathy. So let's go back to this other Florida signature species, the burrowing owl. And I am so lucky because Cape Coral has the largest population of burrowing owls in the United States. They're one of the smallest owls in the country, about 8 inches. And they are different than most owls in that they are diurnal. They are out during the daytime, as opposed to being mainly nocturnal. As I already mentioned, the Cape Coral Friends of Wildlife, they keep a close survey on all the burrowing owls in the area. Boy, I forget. I think it's a couple thousand at least that are in the Cape Coral area. They have the perches that have been provided for them. There are ordinances that prohibit building if a owl's nest is on a property. We stay away from them. It looks like I'm pretty close, but I always use a zoom lens. And this is a typical pose. They are so much fun to watch, but I do stay back and give them enough space so as not to disturb them. If you take a look at the feet here, the feet are going one direction. And the owl has his head almost turned around. They can't quite do the 180 degrees, but it certainly looks like it sometimes. And this is part of the PVC perch that is provided for them. Right now, I'm going to go back here. If you go to one of the owl nests, you'll see probably one adult hanging out. And that usually means that the other owl is inside, either building a nest, perhaps she's laid her eggs, or there might be fairly soon these little tiny babies. This is the youngest I've ever seen one out of the nest. When they're that small, they typically don't venture out into the open at all because they're all fluff and long legs. And they just crack me up. Look at this guy. There can be anywhere from 2 to 5, sometimes even, I think the most I saw was 8 babies at one nest. And again, they're not all the same size. There's a runt on the left. They hatch over a period of time. This is what it might look like. And by late April, May, this is what you can find when you go by many yards in Cape Coral. I forgot to mention, it showed the kind of the vacant lots, but many of the burrowing owls are in people's front yards or backyards or in a church parking lot. They're everywhere with the PVC piping and signs to let people know to beware. By the time they're venturing and staying outside the nest, the young ones are about the same size as the adults. And really the only way to tell them apart is the adult on the left has the barring across the chest, while the young ones are still light colored and they have a little bit of down and white at their chins. If you go to a nest and turn your head, there's a good chance the owl will also turn its head. They're also omnivorous. Guess it was frog legs for breakfast this day. Yum. And they're kept pretty busy feeding these young ones. And they make quite a bit of noise waiting for their parents to come back. It's watching them preen and shake out their feathers, being fed. Because there are so many owls in the area, I can spend a few minutes, 10 minutes at one spot and go to another nest a few blocks away without disturbing them. I have this as one of my Instagram photos. I think the burrowing owls are receive the most likes anytime I post. This is, I don't know if you can tell, but I wanted to show, the parents are still doing some excavating. This is sand flying out of the hole as the parents kick it out with their feet. And this is a baby just trying to figure out what's going on. Again, it looks like he was being aggressive, but he really wasn't paying any attention to me. He was just preening. And they just do seem to look angry sometimes. I'm not sure that they are. Eventually, the owls will scurry a little bit farther from their nest, trying their own food finding. I'm not sure it got any nourishment from this clover that was there. I think to wrap up, I wanted to talk about one of the other favorite Florida mammals that I only found out about a few years ago. This is a fox squirrel. And this one I found a little bit north of me in the Babcock-Webb Wildlife Management area. They are so much bigger than the gray squirrels that we're used to, which are usually about 9 to 11 inches long. They can be anywhere from 23 to 28 inches in length. And they like the flatwood habitat. North of the Caloosahatchee River, it's probably the Sherman fox squirrel, like this one, with this black coloring and the white markings on the nose. They are found, actually, even though they're tree squirrels, they're frequently running on the ground and then will jump up. The white muzzle, I just think they're very cute. They're fun. There's another fox squirrel that's found south of here that's endangered because its habitat is endangered. It's very similar. It has slightly different coloring, and that's the big cypress fox squirrel, which is a good one to look for if you're traveling in big cypress area or the Everglades or the Fakahatchee Strand, which are actually some of the places I plan to go to on my next Holbrook travel adventure. So I actually have come to the end of my presentation. And I know there were some questions even before we started about camera equipment. So I want to share just a little bit about that. I've used Canon cameras for a while. Used to use the SLRs, and of course I moved to the digital SLRs a number of years ago. I don't get the most expensive or the most professional level equipment. I'm pretty content for the prosumer level. One of my favorites has been the 7D Mark II, because that has a little bit of reach. It's not a full frame. Most of the photos I've taken recently have been with, or in the slides I showed, with the 7D Mark II with the Canon 100 to 400 millimeter zoom, many times now with extender. I actually prefer the zooms because, for the obvious reason, I can zoom in and out. I can use that lens and carry it around most places to see what I want to see. Occasionally, I have rented bigger lenses. When I've gone to Africa or even in Costa Rica, I might rent a prime lens. Quite frankly, they're expensive and they're heavy. And so I kept the 7D and the 100 to 400 as my primary wildlife kit. There's a question about what I do at night. And that is tricky, especially with wildlife. I have a Canon macro twin light that I use with a macro lens. And I use that quite a bit for nocturnal animals in Madagascar, as well as sometimes things like the poison dart frogs in Costa Rica. I'm pretty careful with using flash with the animals and making sure that's not an issue, doesn't startle them. Another thing I use that helps, it's a better beamer that's a flash extender that allows the flash to reach farther. The best thing though that I found is that the newer cameras have higher ISOs, which allow for lower light, and which brings me to my newest option. I have just let my toe in the water of the mirrorless camera. After renting one, I finally decided to get the fairly new Canon mirrorless R6. Again, it's not the top of the line, but I found it's fine for what I need. I plan to use my existing lens with the mirrorless, but right now, the adapter that I need to use my existing equipment with the mirrorless camera is out of stock. So that forced me, I have no lenses at work right now. There's a great Canon mirrorless RF lens. It's at 100 to 500, but I wanted to use what I have before putting out the money for a new lens, although I did rent it and it's fabulous. But for right now, I'm trying out the RF 600, which is so lightweight. I cannot believe the difference. And now going out with my R6 and the 600, it's worked for what I need. I'll be happy to try some other things, but I've been very pleased with this combination. And even though it's a fixed, the aperture's f11, which is not good for darker areas, but I'm in Florida where it's sunny most of the time. So that's basically what I'm using. I think I answered some of the questions, and I'm going to hand it back to Lisa, I guess, or Lindsay. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. That was really great. Loved seeing all of your photos. There were a lot that I had not seen before, so that was a real treat. So we will open it up for Q&A now. So again, if you have any questions that you'd like to submit, you can go ahead and do that in the Q&A box in your control panel. You'll click that button and you'll get a pop-up and you can type your question in there and we'll be reviewing those. So Cindy, one question, just sticking with the topic of equipment real quick. You mentioned that, for example, when you were photographing the scrub jays, that sometimes you used your phone just because they were so close. Do you have any other tips or experience that can be translated to using an iPhone for wildlife photography?
That's a good question. I use my iPhone a lot, not as much for wildlife, but definitely for landscapes. And in fact, I probably use the iPhone for landscapes and for people and street photographer. It's a little bit trickier for wildlife because although it's getting better, the zoom capabilities aren't great. If you're really close, like the scrub jays, which are literally 2 feet away from me, it's fine. But anything farther than that, it's really hard to, I think, get as good a quality image as I would like. Now, there are a lot of point and shoots cameras that have terrific zooms. So I think that would be my suggestion for a relatively inexpensive, lightweight photography equipment would be the iPhone and a smaller point and shoot option.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see here. We have one person who just wanted to say magnificent photos. Thank you. So thank you for sharing those. We have a couple questions about fox squirrels. One person says that 30 years ago, we would frequently see squirrels in the burnt store area of Punta Gorda. They were dark with light markings, and folks called them monkey squirrels. Do you know, were those fox squirrels?
I don't know for sure, but it sounds like that's a likely possibility.
Okay, great. And we have someone else who says, someone says, I saw a fox squirrel on a tree by the side of the road on the Loop Road in Big Cypress last week. Got a picture of his tail as he ran off. Is that a separate species from the Sherman fox squirrel that you mentioned?
Yes.
They say they've seen fox squirrels in Corkscrew and thought that they were the same.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I know from reading about them that the ones north of the Caloosahatchee are supposed to be the Sherman fox squirrel, and south of the Caloosahatchee, or certainly in Big Cypress, that would be it's actually called the Big Cypress fox squirrel, but they're very similar.
Okay, great. Going back to the topic of equipment really quickly, one person says, thank you, Cindy, your backyard is also ours. We love the Charlotte Flatwoods area. If you only had one lens for your camera, what would be your choice?
Yeah, one lens, it would probably have to be the 100 to 400. Although there are, just because I like that one so much, but I know there are others that are actually a little more versatile. In Canon, I think there's, I'm not going to remember the exact specifications, but there's one that's, I don't know, 28 to 300. And there are new ones coming out all the time. 70 to 200 is a nice all-around lens. And if you're not interested in, if you don't have to zoom up real close, there are ones that for just all-around travel, something like a 28 to 135 is a nice lens too.
Great, thank you. What's the advantage of using an extender, and are you pleased with the sharpness?
Yeah, I have, as long as the advantage to the sharpness or to the extender is that it increases, it magnifies 1.4 times what you're seeing. So if I have the 100 to 400 extended all the way, then it's like having a 600 millimeter lens. The disadvantage is that you lose a stop. So it has to be bright, brighter than normal, and it's not as fast. And it does lose some sharpness around the edges. But for most of what I do, I'm satisfied with it, especially with the newer renditions. There's the Canon 100 to 400 II that came out probably 4 or 5 years ago now, and the latest extender worked pretty well. And the new ones that have just been created for the mirrorless cameras are supposed to be even better.
Great. Do you use the back button autofocus on the R6? And can you talk about pros and cons?
I have, because I've only had the R6 for 2 weeks, and so I haven't used the back button yet, but I will when I have some time to get out with that.
Great. We have someone who said, thank you. I had a question on how you get photos of wildlife without them running away from you, and how do you get such good, clear photos while they're moving without any of the blur?
Well, patience for one thing. If I'm watching them, I can be sitting for a long time to watch them move. I try to stay as unobtrusive of it as I can. So I might see something fairly far away, and rather than walking right up to the scrub jay or a meadowlark, I will sit down and then I'll kind of crawl, or it's not a pretty sight because I'm not getting any younger, but I even do that around a little pond by my house and stay low. And at the beach, I get down on my belly in the sand. Again, it might take me a while to get up. As far as sharp, it's all about the right. I used a fast shutter speed. And it's much easier now with the newer cameras that allow for a higher ISO. So I can shoot at 800 or 1200 or even higher now. And that allows me to, for birds in flight, I'm usually shooting at a shutter speed of 1250 or higher, preferably 1600. And that helps keep them in focus. And practice and just getting that focus point on the eye of the bird. And the new cameras help with that too. They've got some incredible auto tracking now.
You mentioned patience and practice, and I think that was one of the things that I took away from your presentation was just the benefit of going back to the same place and seeing some of the same animals over and over again. You really get a chance to practice shooting the same subject and really refine what you're doing. So I appreciated that part of your presentation.
Thank you. And if I can add, it's also watching the birds enough to get some cues from their behavior about when they're going to fly, things to look for after watching them for a period of time. And it's, you know, just kind of getting in their space and being there, watching if they fly back from one perch to another. So when they come back, then you're ready for that moment when they're going to take off again. And just learning the habits of the different species.
Sure. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. We do have a comment. Hi from your Cincinnati friends, Bob and Beth. Wonderful presentation and amazing photos. Thank you.
Bob and Beth.
Another comment, your photos are beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Let's see, let's try and narrow these down here. Wonderful presentation, thank you. Wondering about post-shoot processing, Photoshop, Lightroom, cropping, etc.
Yep, I do use Photoshop. And I use that to varying degrees. Sometimes I like to play with things and create photo art. I don't, I guess because I started using Photoshop a number of years ago before Lightroom was available, I've never really folded that into my process. And I typically use Bridge to, in fact, that's what I use for my slideshow. Bridge is a part of Photoshop that allows me to take a look at my photos, and I go through them and rank them in Bridge. Anymore, I do most of the post-processing just within Adobe Camera Raw, and I do the little bit of tweaking there. I don't do major changes. Since I shoot in RAW, then I always have to do, I typically have to do a little bit of tweaking with highlight and contrast, sometimes a little bit of saturation. That's mostly what I do now.
Okay. Someone asked, would you mind speaking just very briefly about the Florida Naturalist program?
Yep. It's a great program. There are 4 different modules. In the past, and I'm not gonna be able to name all of them, but that's the shores. There's a wetlands one. There's an uplands, and I'm forgetting the 4th one. They're offered all over Florida in conjunction with different education venues at Audubon Corkscrew Swamp. I know recently they've, due to COVID, and it's actually kind of an interesting thing, of course, they've been online and people have been able to register, and instead of doing the field trips together, go out and do some self-discovery based on the information given in class. It gives you a great background in what's here in Florida. And I found I haven't completed them all. It was great for me moving from Ohio to Florida, which has a completely different vegetation, and finding out a little bit more about just what's here around me.
Great, thank you. And then we'll wrap it up with this one last question and then close it out briefly talking about some upcoming events that we have, including one of your trips. When you lead a photo tour, how much instruction or do you do much instruction and sharing of tips, and what is usually the range of abilities on your tours as far as photography?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for that. It depends upon the trip. Sometimes I lead them that are primarily photography trips. Others are a combination where I'm always taking photos and there's always people there with me taking photos, and I'll help people as much or as little as they wish. But sometimes I have a group that's more just people interested in learning about the place or the natural habitat and like to take pictures, but they it's not as much about the photography. For the photography, I would say I have worked more with beginners to intermediate and helping people get the best images they can with the equipment they have. So if it's an iPhone, I can give you tips there. If it's what are some of say a Canon PowerShot or a Nikon, I forget the names of the models, but just what will work best and as far as composing and working with what you have. For people who are interested, and if it's more a photography trip, then I'd like to have sessions in the evening where we share our images and talk about how to improve those, what to look at, how to use your manual setting if that's something that you're interested. I try to tailor it to the needs of the people in that group.
Gotcha.
If that answers enough.
It does, yeah, thank you. And I think that's a good segue for what we're going to talk about next. As we've alluded to, we're excited to share that Cindy will be co-leading a trip to some of these very areas that we talked about in the presentation today. That will be coming up in April of next year, 2022, and will be a custom trip based on her experiences and experience in some of those areas. Lisa, would you like to speak to that at all? Just briefly talk about the trip?
Sure. I enjoyed working with Cindy on this. Of course, these were all her personal experiences put into this itinerary, and there are places that I wasn't even aware of, and I'm excited to learn more about them. So you're going to spend a couple days in the Fort Myers area, which is Cindy's backyard, visit the 6 Mile Cypress Slope Preserve, of course, spend some time with the burrowing owls and learn about the clinic for rehab and wildlife there. Also, time will be spent on Sanibel Island with a visit to the J.N. Ding Darlin Wildlife Refuge, and also a nice boat ride around Sanibel Captiva, where you'll have a chance to get some beautiful marine pictures and also marine birds and possibly some mangroves. Continuing on to a wonderful neighbor of Fort Myers would be going to the Everglades area with a visit to the Audubon Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary and the Fakahatchee Strand Preserve State Park, and ending with a couple of days in Everglades National Park, including the Ernest Coe Visitor Center, the Flamingo Visitor Center, and Shark Valley Visitor Center. And those in itself are going to be a couple of amazing days with opportunities to shoot roseate spoonbill, glossy ibis, of course, alligators, turtles, and it looks like possibly squirrels as well. And the itinerary will be in April, and we will have it published for additional information very soon, and I'm excited to share it with everybody.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Oh, sorry, Cindy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I was just going to add, yeah, hopefully the goal is to see some of the different habitats that I've talked about, these just wonderful cypress swamps, as well as some of the freshwater marshes, either 6 Mile Cypress Slough, Harns Marsh, is another favorite. And I'll kind of tailor it also to where the birds are when we begin the trip, because I will have been here scouting for the days and months before that. So I'll know where to go to find what we want to see. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. I love the area south of here, like the Fakahatchee Strand and the Everglades. They're just truly special.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful.
So yeah, we will have more information about that coming soon, so stay tuned. We'll be sharing that when it becomes available. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we're back up and running with our webinar series. So our next webinar is scheduled for a week from today, Wednesday, March 10th. And we'll be hearing about conservation and climate change in Monteverde, Costa Rica from Sarah Stuckey, who has been active in local community development and conservation initiatives in the Monteverde region for more than 20 years. And then 2 weeks after that, Wednesday, March 24th, we'll be heading way north to Churchill in Manitoba, Canada, to hear about polar bears, beluga whales, conservation, and climate science with Dr. Stephen Peterson. So we'll be sending out invitations for both of those events soon, and we hope that you can join us. With that, we'll go ahead and conclude our presentation today. Today's webinar has been recorded, and we'll be sending out a link in the next couple of days to that recording, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel and on our website, where you can find all of our past webinars. Thank you so much to Cindy for sharing your expertise and your beautiful photography with us, and to all of you who joined us today. We're so glad we got to spend part of our Wednesday with you, and we wish you a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.